In this video, I'll show you how to get started with a Gradle project using IntelliJ IDEA and Git for version control. This is an update to a video I made about a year ago because some of the interfaces have changed in the recent versions of the IDE, and my default advice has also changed a little bit too. So let's start by making a new project. We can see that I have Gradle selected, and any project SDK should be okay here. And make sure we give it a good name. Now, if you're new to Gradle, it's important to know that when the project opens, you have to wait for the Gradle build to complete before you can move on. There we go. Let's add a little bit of code to this project so that we can make sure all the other pieces are working. I'll add a new test class. And that should be good enough. Now remember, we can run all of our tests by right-clicking on the test folder and choosing Run Tests. That's enough code for us to make sure that everything else is working. So now, let's go ahead and integrate Git for version control. I'll go to the VCS menu and choose Enable Version Control Integration. Git is the default option, although there are some other ones. Now, one thing to watch for is that when I hit OK, there will be two changes to the interface. We'll see a change here on the side and here on the bottom. I'll click OK now. So down in the bottom, we get a message that it did create a Git repository in the location of the project. We also have a new tab here. And up here on the left, we have a new view called Commit. Now, this is one particular thing that has recently changed in IntelliJ IDEA. So if you watch some of my older videos, or in fact others' older videos, you may have seen this commit interface in the Git view below. But now it's using what's called a non-modal interface. Okay, now before we can actually start using Git for anything useful, we have to tell Git which files to track. Now it's important that we only track a subset of these files. In fact, conveniently, the ones we need are the files from the Gradle folder down to settings.gradle. We definitely do not want the build folder nor the .gradle folder. In a previous video, I suggested adding some files from the .idea folder, but that actually will cause some problems for teams where you have different operating systems or different installations of the JDK, and so for the majority of my audience, I don't recommend this. Of course, if you're in a corporate environment, they may have some particular files from the .idea folder that they do in fact want you to track. To add these to version control, we can right-click and choose Git and then Add. Now, let's look at this Commit tab. Previously, the default change list was empty, but now I can see there are these 7 files in it. And in fact, those are exactly the files we need in order to reproduce this project. Crucially, we have build.gradle, which is our Gradle configuration, sampletest.java, which is the source code we wrote, and the other files are simply necessary for Gradle to get up and running. I'll select all the files in this change list and commit them to my repository. I need to provide a good commit message here. Initial commit is a conventional one for the first one, and then click Commit. Notice the pop-up down here that suggests that project configuration files can be added to Git. This is where I suggest simply ignoring this now. From the Git view, I can look at the log and see that I have one commit in my repository. Now, let's see how we can push that one commit out to GitHub so that my team members can access it. Over on GitHub, I'll make a new repository. You can make it public or private at your discretion, but definitely don't add these files that it recommends. Rather than have GitHub initialize these, we would create these within IntelliJ and then commit them and push them. So let's create this repository. Great. Now I'm using SSH authentication, which means I'm going to make sure SSH is selected and choose this URL. I know a lot of my students will be using HTTPS, so just make sure you have the right one selected. To push these changes to GitHub, we go to the Git menu and choose Push, or you can choose the Push option from the toolbar. The first time you do this, you have to tell it where you want to push to. That's called the remote. So I'll click Define Remote and paste in that URL. Now, if this is your first time doing this or you're using HTTP authentication, it may go through a web round trip to make sure that IntelliJ IDEA is allowed to use your credentials for GitHub. But again, because I'm using SSH, I don't need to worry about that. We can see in the preview here which files are going to be pushed, so let's go ahead and do that. Now we can see that the operation is complete, so let's switch back to the browser, reload this page, and there we go, there's our project. So from here, any of our teammates should be able to say, I want to get this code, and again, choose HTTPS or SSH depending on your needs. From the IDE, say File, New, Project from Version Control, and paste in that URL. And that's how you can make your changes locally, commit them to Git, push them to GitHub, and make them available to your team. Happy programming!